The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go? This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Ed Dowd, the former hedge fund manager, whistleblower, and author. You spent most of your career on Wall Street, with 10 years as a managing director for BlackRock, the world's largest asset management firm, overseeing a $14 billion fund. Your book, Cause Unknown, The Epidemic of Sudden Deaths in 2021 and 2022, explores the sudden surge of deaths in working-age people that most significantly was not attributed to COVID-19. You believe that the unexpected and sudden deaths of so many young and healthy people constitutes a national security concern. You also assert we are beginning a deflationary cycle that will become a recession and lead to a global economic collapse. From here, you expect the rollout of a central bank digital currency. Last month, you became co-treasurer for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign to seek the Democratic nomination for president. Ed, welcome back to London Real.
Great to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me on again.
Great to have you here. I love it having you on because we can talk about so many different things. But first, I've got to ask you about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign. You know, I first met Robert when I had him on my show in May of 2020. I think he was the second guest I ever had on our Digital Freedom platform, which I had to create because we were getting censored by YouTube. And I walked into that episode telling Robert I was going to get my vaccine. And by the end of the episode, my scientific MIT trained brain was thinking, wait a second, I need to really listen to this man and think long and hard about it. And I had an amazing conversation with Robert. We've had him on since. And quite frankly, it just kills me when I look at the mainstream media's portrayal of him, because anybody who's ever spent an hour talking to Robert can realize he is an incredible man, has a tremendous amount of integrity, a great vision. And so I was just really happy to see him running and to see you associated with his campaign. How's that been for you, and how did that happen?
Yeah, Bobby wrote the foreword to my book, and he was one of the people who, along with Gavin DeBecker and Tony Lyons of Skyhorse Publishing, they all kind of pitched the book to me. And they said it's important that I use my data and get my voice out there, because it was a different voice at the time. It was a Wall Street voice. It was a trend analysis voice. I didn't go into the science. I went into the body counting, ones and zeros, disabilities, ones and zeros, and now we have injuries, ones and zeros. So that was my contribution to this fight. I've got to know Bobby. I've done a couple speaking events with him for some of his former, well, he's no longer with CHD, the nonprofit he founded because he's running for president. But we did some events, got to know him very well. He's a man, like you said, of integrity and honor and truth, and that's an emerging trend. I think it's a nascent trend, but it's going to explode. And I think all the leaders going forward are going to have to exhibit those characteristics because the current clown show we have is full of gaslighting, lies, and deceit, and all the people that are currently occupying seats of power have to go, in my humble opinion, and hopefully peacefully.
What a crazy concept that our leaders have to embody truth and integrity, right?
Absolutely. And here's the thing about Bobby. So, when I joined the campaign, there was the first call. It was the exploratory committee before he decided to run, and I was tapped for that. So I was there early days, and he said on the call, there were some pollsters on the call, and he said, "Look, guys, I'm going to lead. A lot of candidates lead from behind with the polls. I'm going to speak the truth. I'm going to speak what I believe to be true. I'm not going to be poll driven. And when I heard that, that's when I was like, this is going to be great. And so you can see from his public appearances, he's not holding any punches. He's not, testing something first to see if it's going to resonate with the public. He's just saying what he believes to be true. And again, one of the biggest parts of his platform is freedom first. And we have medical tyranny and lack of First Amendment rights in this country at the moment. And until we get those back, all the other issues you may or may not agree with Bobby on are kind of kicking around sand in the sandbox. Without those core tenets of medical autonomy and freedom of speech, we got nothing. So that's what we can all rally around. Get back to that. You get the corrupt, and he's very familiar with all the agencies. He's worked with them in his prior environmental law practices, and he knows how the bureaucracy works, and he knows how it's been perverted and corrupted. So he's the man for me, and I think he's the man for the nation.
Yeah, it's a breath of fresh air to see a candidate who speaks his truth, and it resonates in 10 seconds of listening to him. It's like, well, here's a guy who really is telling you what he really thinks. It's not some canned line. It hasn't been ironed out and gone through all the approvals of all these committees and fundraisers. It's like, he's telling you what he truly believes. It's, and it's noticeable for me. And I think for a lot of people too. I mean, he's got some great poll numbers, and depending on who you ask, I mean, I've heard behind the scenes that if you look at the real numbers, he's not actually far behind Biden, even though I think the official polls have him at 20%, which is still super strong for a candidate that just announced.
Yeah, what's interesting is the establishment press is starting to talk about the fact that Biden has a Kennedy problem, and that's a good thing. And it is a problem, and there's chatter amongst the oligarchic class that they have to figure out a way to get rid of Biden and get someone else in there soon, because if this is allowed to continue, Bobby has a very high chance of grabbing the nomination if they don't fix it. The establishment, that is, not us, obviously.
Can Bobby grab the nomination from a Democratic Party that won't even let Biden debate? Is that possible?
I think it's possible, and what's going on is guerrilla media. I mean, his message is getting out there. He was asked, does he care about the censorship, and he said no. There's a lot of independent voices. The trust in the media has never been so low. This COVID debacle, this vaccine debacle, has shattered the trust in many institutions. And personally, my social media metrics continue to accelerate, and that's not because of me per se. It's because of the information and message that I have, and people are finding me word of mouth, and it's spreading. I can sense a spreading acceleration of what the truth is getting out there. I mean, obviously, lives need to be saved, and I'd love for the people in charge to declare the truth. But if we have to spread it word of mouth, then so be it.
I did a search for him here in London on my Google in the news just to see who was covering him. And of course, The Guardian came up, one of the publications here in London, and it called Robert a conspiracy theorist anti-vaxxer, and then was just pulling out all this nonsense. And I was like, really? That's how you're going to cover this guy? And I don't know. Sometimes I continually to be shocked at what the mainstream media does, to things. It still surprises me after all these years.
Well, I put out a tweet a couple weeks ago that we have a dearth of conspiracy theories. We're undersupplied because a lot of the ones we had have come true. So we need new ones. It's
so true. After we got done fighting YouTube in 2020 and we set up our Freedom platform, and on that platform I had, people like Bobby and a bunch of other doctors that were speaking the truth. After that, I ran to be mayor of London. So I spent 7 months in the spotlight with the mainstream media coming after me. So I know what it feels like to read a headline and you're reading about somebody that has your name, but it has not a single shred of truth in it. And it's like clickbait done to the extreme, and to see publication after publication after publication come out with that. So I know what it feels like. But I'm glad Bobby is confident that, like you said, the guerrilla media will get the message out to people. And yeah, him against Biden, you're right. They should really start to worry because it's night and day. And again, it's just, you couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, Biden takes a fall yesterday, and it's just like they're still going to try to sell that to the public. And versus Bobby, it's just kind of hard to believe. But I guess potentially those are the two candidates, right?
Yeah, the Biden fall was interesting. People wanted me to, retweet that, and I'm at the point now where it's just sad, and I don't need to highlight an old man falling. What I think we should all do, collectively, is shame folks who even try to pretend that this is okay. It's not. Making fun of Biden is kind of passe. We should make fun of the people who actually try to gaslight us in our own discussions locally and with friends. If anybody at a cocktail party says to me anything about Biden that's remotely favorable, I'm good. You just shame them right then and there, and you just say, "Look, I can't take you seriously. This guy's not well. He's sick."
Yeah, I had similar feelings. Like, I don't like putting someone down, but then I also see that he's embodying some just terrible things to happen to the country. So yeah, I think your call is probably the better way to go there. And again, I've heard Bobby talk about this censorship industrial complex that he's dealing with. But this is probably the best thing that he could do for his quote unquote image, because they were able to pigeonhole him, kind of last year. And even though his book was like the bestseller in America, he didn't get any coverage. But it feels like with him running for president, now the media is having to address him somewhat. And I feel like people are really starting to see more of what he's about, which I think is good for everybody. So, yeah, I was really happy to see you on board with that, and wishing you all the best. Let me know how we can help over here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Let's jump into a couple things because you've been talking about what we're looking at here with this economy, and I'm just curious if your opinion has changed in the last couple months. I think the last time we were on talking, I think Silicon Valley Bank had just tanked. Now we've seen these inflation numbers seem to be revising to be potentially less catastrophic. But now we're also hearing rumors of recessions happening here in Britain and in America. Real estate prices seem to be dropping globally. You understand this because you worked on Wall Street, and like you said, you go by the numbers. What do you see happening in this economy in the last few months, and what should people really get their head around what's really happening here?
So in November of last year, we put out an economic report. My partners at Finance Technologies calling for a recession in Q3 and Q4. As we've rolled through the first 6 months of this year, our early cycle indicators are telling us the recession will be as deep as the S&L crisis in the 90s economically. Again, what the financial assets do remains to be seen, but we suspect it'll be bad. And we just put out a report yesterday, an inflation update. We're now calling for deflation to rear its ugly head around Q1 of 2024. We're seeing a monetary supply credit contraction that's going to exacerbate the already weakening economic fundamentals. So we're looking for inflation numbers to come down hard. And we're thinking that's going to manifest itself in Q1 of 2024. So all this inflation talk is really rear view mirror. By the time we get to Q1 of 24, they'll be talking about deflation, and there'll be a policy response from the Fed and the powers that be. The Fed will probably go from QT, quantitative tightening, to QE. There'll be chatter at that time of a central bank digital currency, we suspect, and potentially a universal basic income, if it's as bad as we think this economic downturn could be. We don't know yet whether it's going to go systemic, meaning it causes the plumbing of the financial system to become unglued like the great financial crisis. But if that happens, Katie barred the door. I suspect this budget deal that we saw, I put out a tweet on this yesterday. Everyone's been confused by this debt ceiling deal. Speaker McCarthy seemed to surrender everything to the Democrats. He did a 2-year deal that's uncapped, so it's capped in time but not price. So it gives the government the ability to spend $4 to $5 trillion, and everyone's confused. Everyone feels betrayed. I suspect if it isn't blackmail or payola schemes for McCarthy, it's likely that he was informed of the coming economic downturn, and the government's going to need the ability to spend a ton of deficit spending into a recession. So I think it's a tell. It's a tell of how bad things are going to get going into the end of this year and into next year. And we have a problem. The U.S. government's going to start issuing bonds again. That's going to crowd out other investments. So we're going to see financial assets start to correct fairly shortly here. The stock market, technically, I don't want to get into it, but we're close to the stock market in the U.S. rolling over hard and catching up with the reality of the earnings of the companies in the S&P that are going to start going down, and there'll be layoffs coming. It's going to be very interesting in the second half of this year, especially into the fall.
And how can the Fed still be talking about raising rates at this point? How can they still be implying or threatening that they're going to go up another quarter in the near-term future when so many signs seem to be pointing out that this is really going to hurt when it goes the other way? Like you said, more like Q1 next year.
Well, so when they were raising like jackrabbits the last year, they were unified. Now we're starting to see some dissent going on in the governor board, the Federal Reserve Board. We're starting to see some people say we should pause, we should take a moment to breathe. I think what the mistake they're making, especially Powell, is they're looking at the unemployment, which is artificially low. We think it's because the labor pool is smaller than they think. We've due to the vaccine injuries and the disabilities and the deaths, we think the labor pool is slightly smaller. So we figure the unemployment rate of 3.5% is really 2.7%. And 0.7% has been shaved off through the disabilities, deaths, and injuries. And the injuries manifest themselves in lost work time and lost work and absences, which went off the rails in 2022. 13 standard deviations above a 20-year trend, both in the U.S. and the UK. We just did the UK data, and they look exactly the same. So if you don't think it's the vaccines, what is it, and why aren't we talking about it? It's basically a bunch of people in the workforce who are chronically sick.
Yeah, let's actually just highlight that quickly, because from a data guy, when you see two different countries separated by an ocean that have a lot of fundamental differences, even though they're both G7, and you see a similar number of standard deviations like that, how does that make you feel?
Oh, I first of all, for those in the audience who don't understand what standard deviation is, it's a probability distribution curve, and a 3 standard deviation event is what we call a tail event, and it happens 0.03% of the time. And on Wall Street, that's a big deal. 3, just 3. All you need is 3, and guys on Wall Street start to worry. Well, this work absence and work time lost is 12 and 13 standard deviations in the UK and US in 2022. That's a black swan event. I mean, that just boggles the mind. This deviation from trend just and happening in both countries simultaneously is a signal. And again, using deductive reasoning and simple logic, this trend started in 2021 and accelerated in 2022. So you have to ask yourself, what changed in 2021? Well, mass vaccination programs and mandates in the US. So unless someone has a better explanation, it needs to be investigated, but it doesn't seem to be even acknowledged, or that statistic even being talked about by the governments. I mean, the numbers are just there in the US Bureau of Labor Statistics and the UK ONS data. It's just there.
And so while we're here, and for people that might not know the entire background, do you want to talk about the excess deaths and the way that you've tracked this, and what the book is really about, and the cost of the economy? I think you had made it an estimated $147 billion in damage, and just kind of those assertions, because I think those missing work numbers, they kind of roll off of that from your research.
Yeah, correct. So the journey I began was just following some trends, and some of the earliest trends were excess deaths. They started showing up in the insurance company results in 2021, funeral home results, meaning funeral home companies were beating and raising earnings. And while the management teams were they were legitimately expecting after the first wave of COVID to go back to normal trend, but it didn't. And they started to become growth companies, which again, we should be asking ourselves, why are funeral home companies growth stocks again? So those two trends led me to other databases like the CDC, to Society of Actuaries. And what we found is there was a mix shift from old to young. So during 2020, there were excess deaths, but they're mostly old. It became established fact that COVID mostly affected older folks with comorbidities. Well, then suddenly in 2021, excess deaths took off, especially in the working population, more so than the general population. And that was proven in my book, and it's continued to this day. The Society of Actuaries just released their 2022 report, and young folks are continuing to die in their group life business in the millennial age group, 12% more than the general U.S. population. So again, whatever's happening is affecting the working folks in all countries across the Western nations. So that's something that needs to be investigated. It's not normal, and it's flipped. It's a relationship that it never held before. In fact, the Society of Actuaries had proven in a study in 2016, which I QR code in my book, that their business is a good business. They determined that group life policyholders die normally at 1/3 the rate of the general U.S. population in any given year, and that all flipped in 2021. There was an 8% differential, 40% excess deaths between 25 and 64 in group life versus 32% in the general U.S. population in 2021. So excess deaths have come down since then, but they're still high for the working folks, and that continues. We're running now between 15 and 20% excess deaths across all Western nations right now.
That's extremely high.
10% is a once in a 200-year flood, according to Scott Davison at One America. He said that in January of 2022. So statistically, 10% is crazy. That's 3 standard deviations. 40% is off the charts. That's what happened in 21. And 20% is an abomination. And unfortunately, the trend into 2023 doesn't seem to be normalizing yet. It's still running quite high, especially in group life. And group life for me is the smoking gun, because these are the people that work at the Fortune 500 mid-sized companies who are basically mandated.
Yeah, that was my next question. What do you expect to happen to those numbers in 23 in different places around the world? And is it going to be correlated to where the vaccine is still being promoted or even mandated?
I'm sure that's going to be part of our analysis. Our biggest fear is that we don't know the medium and long-term effects. And what concerned us when we produced the vaccine damage report, the number you referenced of about 150 billion in economic damages, what we saw that was disturbing was that the absence and work time lost accelerated into 2022. It became significantly worse. It was 6 standard deviations in 21 in both the UK and the US, and then it accelerated to 13 and 12 standard deviations. So we're concerned that even though you may not be getting boosters, there may be a certain segment of the population where damage has been done and your immune system's been compromised. So you're injured and you're chronically getting ill. And unfortunately, these buckets are not static. So you can go from injured to disabled, potentially dead. And here are the numbers we found in 2022: 300,000 excess deaths in the US due to we believe to the vaccine. We think that's low.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.